So I'd like to thank Lars for keeping the introduction mercifully short. And I want to say it's a great pleasure to be speaking to you with some of the friends in the audience and my former postdoc advisor. I was a postdoc here in the years 1982 to 1985, and I got a huge amount of value out of KITP. It was just a life-changing experience, and this is my chance to give something back to the community, and so I'm happy to do that. So what I want to talk about is turbulence, and the title of my talk is Beyond Chaos, the Continuing Enigma of Turbulence. I will be mostly talking about the subject itself and the intellectual debate that goes on in the subject, but at the end I'll talk a somewhat personalized view about some of the things that we're debating here at the KITP. So the things I'm going to talk about is my own personal views, and if somebody else equally qualified were to give this talk, they would choose a different set of topics and a different way to present it, but hopefully you'll find this interesting. I will talk about some original work, and that was done with students Hongyan Shi and an undergraduate, Zonglin Qi, who is now in the graduate program at Princeton. All right, so we're at the Kavli Institute for Theoretical Physics, and so the question that I really want to ask is, well, why are we, as theoretical physicists, talking about turbulence? What does theoretical physics itself have to say about turbulence? Now, one of the great highlights of my time as a postdoc in KITP in Santa Barbara was when Richard Feynman, the very famous Nobel laureate who got the Nobel Prize for his work on the quantum theory of electricity and magnetism, so he came and visited and gave a wonderful talk about negative probabilities, and I got to fulfill my sort of lifetime ambition. I got to talk with him. I'd followed his lectures when I was at high school, and so that was a great moment. So when I was thinking about this talk and trying to prepare it, I remembered passages that he'd written in his famous lectures on physics, and so I thought I would share those with you. So what can theoretical physics tell us about turbulence? Well, basically nothing, according to turbulence. So he says there's a physical problem common to many fields that is very old, that has not been solved. It is not the problem of finding new elementary particles, new fundamental particles at all, but something left over from a long time ago, over 100 years. Nobody in physics has really been able to analyze it mathematically satisfactorily, in spite of its importance to the sister sciences, to the analysis of circulating or turbulent fluids. And he goes on to say what the problem is. All you have to do is take a pipe that is very long and push water through it at high speed. And the question is this: to push a given amount of water through that pipe, how much pressure do you need? Okay, it's a very, very simple problem, and we still don't know how to calculate it. We still don't know the answer. And if the water flows very slowly, or if we use a thick goo like honey, then we can do a fine job. That's easy. Okay, but this problem, when it goes at high speed, we still don't know, and that's why this problem is so hard. In fact, people say that this is the greatest unsolved problem of classical physics. So what Richard Feynman said was, this is the central problem which we ought to solve someday, and we have not. And we still haven't, even though he wrote these words in 1963. But I think I'll show you tonight that we've made some progress in understanding some aspects of this problem. Okay, so if I'm going to answer the question, what can theoretical physics tell us about turbulence, let's ask the other question, a bit more fundamental. What can theoretical physics tell us about anything at all? Okay, not obvious. Okay, so and actually, while we're at it, let's really roll up our sleeves. What is theoretical physics anyway? So let me see if I can try to answer these questions for you. So let's start off by talking about these people. These are the winners of the Nobel Prize in Physics for last year, 2016. They run it for a field that's my intellectual home, condensed matter theory, David Thouless, Mike Kosterlitz, and Duncan Haldane. All of these, by the way, are British theoretical physicists who made their careers in the United States. So in some sense, Margaret Thatcher owes a lot of credit for this prize as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about what they got the Nobel Prize for, at least Kosterlitz and Thouless, because it's germane to this subject. So let's start off by talking not about regular fluids like the ones that you're used to, but let's talk about superfluids. So here's the sort of fluids that you're used to. This is honey. It's a regular, normal fluid. It flows very slowly. It's very viscous. It's sticky. It's gooey. So we all know what honey is. This is superfluid helium, and this is a photograph taken at 1 degree or so above absolute zero, and it shows an effect called the fountain effect, where if you heat the fluid up, it actually causes it to move in a way that's very hard to explain unless you use quantum mechanics. So this is superfluid helium. But what's remarkable about superfluid helium is that in some sense or other, it flows without any viscosity at all. So if you try to stir it up, it will just keep on going. It's basically the nearest thing we have in nature to perpetual motion. And so this clearly is the opposite of perpetual motion. You walk through honey, you get stuck very quickly. This stuff has no viscosity at all. Now, what's special about this fluid is the following. If I put my fingers into a classical fluid, like water, doesn't work so well in honey, and stir it up, I can make it swirl around an arbitrary amount. I'm using swirl here, quotation marks, to let you know that I'm making some kind of simplification that the experts in the audience will understand. If you take a quantum fluid, like the superfluid helium, and try to stir it up and make it rotate, what you find is that it can't swirl slower than a certain amount. The angular momentum, the rotational properties of the fluid, come in lumps, just like energy does, as Einstein was one of the first to show. So this is what makes it quantum. This fact that it can swirl as slow as you like is what makes it classical. Now, what Costas and Thales did was they considered a model which is depicted here in this picture. This is a lattice. It's a lattice in space. It has little arrows on it. Those arrows you can think of as representing the flow of a quantum fluid, of the superfluid. They just represent the direction in which the fluid is flowing. What they discovered was something amazing. Just by looking at the properties of that very simple model, and really all they had in the model was that there exists some arrows. There's nothing quantum mechanical in the model. There's nothing like that at all. There's nothing even very superfluid about it, nothing even fluid. They discovered that they could predict how the fluid underwent this transition as you cooled it to low temperatures, how it went from being a normal fluid, normal helium, to being a superfluid. I'm not going to explain this graph, but it shows the experimental data and their prediction, and all of that works very well. So the remarkable thing is that, as you can imagine, superfluids, and these are superfluids in 2 dimensions, not 3 dimensions, are very complicated. You have to worry about, if you started to think about this from scratch, you'd think you'd have to include everything you need to know about helium and its atomic structure and its chemistry and so on. But none of that seems to matter at all. They showed how it goes from helium to being a superfluid just by looking at the simplest way that you can arrange arrows on a plane in terms of their energetics. It's a very, very simple thing. And the surprise is that this very simple model, which doesn't look anything like the original physical system that you're studying, works and predicts very complex phenomena. Now, in fact, everything we know about the physical world comes from looking at simple mathematical models that have the right properties. Symmetry and topology would be some examples of those, but the beauty is you can sometimes construct surprising models that seem to have no relation at all to the problem you're trying to understand, and yet they turn out to be identical. And we're going to see an example of that later on in this talk. So here's another example. This is not superfluids in 2 dimensions. This is a simulation of superfluid turbulence in 3 dimensions. And this here shows you a very complicated pattern of what are called vortex lines, quantum vortex lines in the superfluid. These are mathematical singularities inside the fluid. They're kind of like cosmic strings, which some of you may have heard about. They have the same sort of mathematical properties as those. And as they flow, they go through each other, they cut each other, they form this incredibly complicated space-time pattern. And from this, you can construct all sorts of, you can make various predictions about what such a fluid would behave like, and those predictions agree with experiment. What's surprising is that this code, the simulation that did this, was a 5-line computer program. Okay? It used the same kind of simple mathematical structure that Kostitz and Thouless used in their work, but to study something as complicated as this quantum turbulence. Now, that's an introduction to some recent theoretical physics, but what is theoretical physics and how do you recognize theoretical physicists when you see them? Well, these are some of the theoretical physicists that you might run into at the University of Illinois. They look more or less normal, at least they do to me. I hope they do to you. So you can't tell much from that. How about this? How about the lab? So here's the question I want you to think about. This is a blackboard, okay, and the question we want to talk about now is this. Is this theoretical physics? Okay, how many people think it is? Yeah, I see a lot of people nodding their heads. Well, the thing is that it's my blackboard, and so it probably is, right, because I'm a theoretical physicist. However, what you didn't hear in the introduction is that I work half my time on condensed matter physics and turbulence and things like this, and the other half of my time I work on biology, on genomic biology, microbiology, ecology, and evolution. This is my blackboard in the Institute for Genomic Biology at my university where I work, so who knows, maybe this isn't theoretical physics. Well, let's have a look at this part. So you might say, aha, well, let's take a look at that. Is that theoretical physics? Nope, it's not theoretical physics. Okay, this is mathematical physics. It's not theoretical physics. Okay, what's the difference? Well, what's sketched over here is just some complicated calculation. It's basically like a math homework problem, except on steroids. Okay? How about this part? Anybody want to guess? Theoretical physics? Well, this one is. Yeah, this one is theoretical physics as it happens. Why? Well, this is a guess about how something behaves. It's actually a guess about the topic of this conference. It's a guess about how fluids become turbulent. So here you've got mathematical physics, just some hard calculation that's being done. Here you've got theoretical physics, and basically theoretical physics is basically maths plus a simple guess. It's some guess that starts you off in doing a calculation and trying to understand what's going on in the physical world. All right, so now you know the difference between mathematics and theoretical physics. If you see theoretical physicists, they're usually doing complicated mathematics, but it doesn't mean they're doing theoretical physics. They may just be trying to get through the day. Okay, so now we want to talk about turbulence. So we need to do theoretical physics and turbulence, and the question I want to ask is, why do we need to guess in turbulence? Because turbulence is the flow of a fluid, and now we're not going to worry about quantum mechanics, we're not going to worry about any of that. We're just going to worry about regular classical physics, the sort of physics that you're familiar with, that you see every day. So why do we need to guess? Well, because think about it, we shouldn't need to guess because we know what governs the motion of all matter outside the quantum regime, and that is F equals ma. Okay? So it's basically the only equation that's going to be in this talk. F equals ma, that goes back 400 years. Everybody here knows that. And what this stands for is force, the mass of whatever the object is, and its acceleration. Now, this isn't actually a very useful way to write down this equation. The best way to write it down is like this. A equals F over m. We're just going to divide both sides. Why? Well, we write it like this because this tells you what's happening to the stuff you're looking at. This tells you what force you're applying. And then this tells you how the thing you're looking at starts to move as a result of that. And that's what you want to know. You want to know, if I push this thing, how fast is it going to go? What's it going to do? And so on. So this is the way. This way is how we should really write down Newton's equation. So what about fluid mechanics? Well, in fluid mechanics, the force is usually gravity. I mean, it rains, the water goes down to the ground. It can be pressure. It can be the viscosity that we talked about before. It could also be magnetic fields in stars, or if you're trying to do a plasma fusion experiment to try to make a tokamak to solve the energy crisis, it would be a magnetic field in that case too. Or it could even come from quarks and gluons. in a particle physics experiment, like the sort of experiment that's done at the relativistic heavy ion collider in Brookhaven. So basically, we know how to write down what the force is. The mass is just the density of the fluid. And then the question we need to understand then is how do we calculate and what do we do with the acceleration? Now, if we know acceleration, we can calculate speed. And so we're going to do a little test calculation just to see if everyone is awake and is following. So what does acceleration means? Well, you know what acceleration means because you all drove here, and if you drove here, your speed changed as you accelerated and slowed down as you got to traffic lights and stoplights and so on. So that means your speed changes every second. So let's do a midterm exam, okay? Now I know this is a public lecture, and you're here as the guest of the KITP and so on and so forth, but you're not going to get off that easily. So we're going to have a midterm. So here's the question. A car accelerates from rest at 9 meters per second for 3 seconds. And the question is this: what is the brand of the car? Okay, so let's work this problem. Okay, so the answer is this. After 1 second, it's going 9 meters per second. After 2 seconds, it's going 18 meters per second. After 3 seconds, it's going 27 meters per second. 27 meters per second is 60 miles an hour. 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, it has to be a Porsche. Okay, so now you know. So a Tesla would do it as well, would it? Okay. Well, you know, I got my data in 2014, so it's probably, you know, a bit out of date. And so anyway, so this tells you basically, the moral of this story is this. If I know the acceleration, I can then calculate how fast it's going to go. And if I know how fast it's going to go, I can tell where it's going to go. Okay, so let's, I'll pause to let people take photographs. Yes, keep going, yes. This is the easiest midterm ever, right? Right, so now let's ask ourselves the question. If we want to apply this formula, A equals F over m, not to one particle, but to every point in a fluid, so it's not just a single particle, the fluid has many, many points, that's when things start to get messy. So let's have a look and see why. So let's suppose I start off by taking a particle and I accelerate it. So this little red arrow is meant to represent its speed in say, the horizontal direction. So that's predictable. If I take a fluid and the speed isn't too high, I can think of the fluid as basically, you know, a little packet of fluid over here, a little packet of fluid next to it, a little packet of fluid next to that, and so on, many times filling the whole room. That's how I would try to describe the air in this room if I was trying to do a calculation or a simulation. So that's what these boxes are meant to represent. Little packets of fluid, and they're moving in some uniform way. And so again, the flow is perfectly predictable, and we can calculate everything there, just as Feynman said. So this is called laminar. This is just flowing steadily, deterministically, predictably, no surprises. Now let's ask what happens if the flow has been perturbed a little bit, or if the flow is going so large, is going fast enough, then what happens is this. You get some random directions for these fluids. These fluid particles start to go off in slightly different directions. But the point is that how far they get depends on their acceleration, and it depends on their velocity, and that depends on the acceleration. So the place that they get to, you can't predict in advance. You have to know how they accelerated to get there. So this regular pattern of the fluid parcels now gets disrupted a second later or something like this. And now this process keeps on going. So if you started off with just a regular pattern of these fluid parcels, after some period of time, they're all going to be higgledy-piggledy all over the place. Now, the other thing about it is these fluid parcels were initially next to each other. As these things move around, they're going to become further and further apart, because this one has a high acceleration, so it moves fast. So the next time you work out how fast it's going to go, it's moved much further than this one. And that's the point, that how far they move depends on what their acceleration is. So they don't all feel the same kind of force. So after a time, if these packets are scattered higgledy-piggledy, and that happens to every packet that you start with, your fluid, instead of being nice and regular and uniform, has got contorted up into this messed up thing like a piece of bread that you're cooking, that you've swirled up like this, and it's become very disordered. And so it's unpredictable, and that's what we call turbulence. Now, what about chaos? Well, if you think about this behavior as being bad in some sense, then what chaos is one particle behaving badly in time. So think about it. There may be a system, let's say some kind of pendulum, that normally it would swing like this, but you can construct pendulums which are coupled to each other in some way, and their motion can be chaotic and unpredictable. And that unpredictability is part of the definition of what chaos is, but it really only applies to one particle behaving in a kind of unpredictable way, but really only in time. Now, when you have turbulence, you have many of these fluid packets all crashing into each other and affecting each other's motion and so on. They're behaving badly, not just in time, but also in space. So turbulence is chaos, but an infinite amount of chaos. Chaos at every single point in space simultaneously and coupled together. That's why the problem of chaos is sort of more or less understood, and we understand many aspects of it, but turbulence is much more complex because it's chaos in space as well as in time. So in a sense then, chaos is unpredictable, but with some kind of simple structure, whereas turbulence is unpredictable, but with very complex structure. So to summarize, the velocity of a fluid blob depends on where it was, where it is going to, and how fast it is going. And if you write that down mathematically, what you see is that the velocity of the fluid governs its own behavior in some kind of self-referential way. And that self-referential way is the thing that when you write down the equation, it makes it nonlinear, it makes it incredibly hard to compute the consequences and so on. But that's really where it comes from, at least in cartoons. Okay, so what is turbulence then? Well, turbulence is a flow that is stochastic and wildly fluctuating. So here's an experiment that was done by Walter Goldberg. This is who I collaborated with. This is a flowing soap film, and you can visualize the flow structure very, very easily. And you can see it has this very complicated structure of swirly motions all intertwined with each other. Just as you can imagine, those cartoon blobs that I showed you before, after they become separated and start moving around in some random way, they start screwing the fluid up in some really crazy way like this, and this is what you end up with. So it's stochastic and wildly fluctuating. The other thing you can see about this is that you have structure, but the structure is on many scales. So there's structure on this large scale, and then if you look inside these swirly bits, you see other swirly bits. And if you look inside those, you see other swirly bits as well, and so on. It's like a Russian doll. And that fact is what makes turbulence interesting, but in some sense also makes it susceptible to some kind of analysis. So now I should tell you about what we have to guess in turbulence. So what is the big guess that starts everything off? We can write down the equations for fluid flow, and they describe fluid turbulence. We can write down Newton's equation, and we believe that those equations would correctly describe turbulence. So we can write down those equations, but they're useless. It's, with few exceptions, it's basically true that almost everything we know about turbulence did not come from solving the equations, but came from guesses and then doing calculations. And the biggest guess of all, probably the biggest progress in understanding turbulence, was made by Kolmogorov and also other people, particularly Richardson, and his idea was the following. This is the big guess. When you look at these swirly motions like this, you might say, what would happen if I animated that? So what you might imagine is I start off with some swirly motion of the fluid, and then it spins off some other swirly motion, some other whirl or vortex, or whatever you want to call it, and then that one breaks up into smaller ones and so on. And you can sort of see that that could have happened here. Now, usually, when things break up and make smaller bits come out of them, it means that they're falling apart. Okay? If you were riding your car and first the tires came off, and then the axle came off, and then the ball bearings came off, and then the engine fell apart, and then you crashed into a tree or something. Well, you know, the failure mode is all the bits coming off, the bigger bits first, and then the smaller bits. So you might think that these swirly motions coming off and making smaller and smaller swirly motions would be a hallmark of turbulence sort of running down. But that's not true at all. These eddies, is what people like to call them, they spin off other eddies, but they do it without losing any energy at all. It's not like when you get a swirly motion, an eddy, and it breaks up into two, it's not like it's kind of run out of steam, and so it's exhausted itself and just makes two little ones and hopes that they'll continue. Not at all. The actual dynamics of that process conserves energy. It's just what they do. That's what makes it so complicated. They don't lose energy in doing it. So there's no friction involved. This isn't due to friction. This breaking up of the eddies is just what these flows do. And so as a result, what they guessed, Richardson and Kolmogorov, they guessed that turbulence is a scale-invariant cascade of energy. And I'm going to show you exactly what that means. Okay? So we're going to see that this idea, this very simple guess, turns out to have remarkable explanatory power. All right, so what do I mean by a scale-invariant cascade? So I'm sure you're very literate, so you know Jonathan Swift, and you may know another. He wrote a poem, and that was modified by Augustin de Morgan, and the poem goes like this. Great fleas have little fleas upon their backs to bite 'em, and little fleas have lesser fleas, and so ad infinitum. Okay? So that's the idea. You've got a flea, and then on its back it's got a flea, and a flea, and another flea, and so on. There's this Russian doll structure, this continuum of all these different creatures, all which live on something and have something living on them. Okay? It's like turtles all the way down, except this is fleas all the way down. So that's a classic poem, but Richardson made one up for turbulence, and his version is this. Big worlds have little worlds that feed on their velocity, and little worlds have lesser worlds, and so on to viscosity. So what happens is this spinning off goes on, and it keeps on going. Eventually what happens is this. Eventually you have to pay the price, because you're putting energy into a fluid. You're sitting there in your bathtub with your fingers in it, sloshing it around like this, and you're putting energy in. What this picture says is those swirls go down to little whirls and littler ones and so on, but you're putting energy in. The only thing that can happen is this. Either the whole thing will blow up because you've put so much energy in, or the energy will go somewhere and it'll stop it blowing up. And that's what happens. It doesn't blow up. When you stir the water in your bath, it does actually heat up, but it doesn't explode. What happens is the energy goes down to smaller and smaller worlds until eventually it gets down to a scale where the fluid viscosity does matter. And then it stops making that structure that I showed you. It does something actually rather boring, and then you generate heat as Joule heating, and the water slightly heats up. But along the way, the energy went from scale to scale without losing energy, just transferring down to smaller and smaller worlds. And so that's what a scale-invariant cascade is. It's a cascade because you go from big to smaller to smaller still and smaller and so on. And it's called scale-invariant because wherever you look, you can't tell where you are in the system. If you're one of those fleas, you look around and you say, okay, am I the middle flea? Well, I've got a flea above me and a flea below me, so I could be anywhere. Okay, go down 10 fleas. That flea also has a flea above it and a flea below it. You can't tell. So you can't tell where you are, and so that's what we mean by scale-invariant. Now, I'm going to show you a graph. I want you to basically ignore it, but what this shows is energy. In fact, it tells, well, it's basically the kinetic energy of the fluid in some sense. What it shows is this. this is the length scales. This goes from large to small. And the picture of turbulence that we generally have is you put energy in here. The energy flows through a range which is scale invariant. And then when you get to small length scales, it dissipates as heat. And this scale invariant cascade, the mathematical way that we see this at scale invariant is that when we look at space, and this k variable means the inverse of space, okay, so just think of that as 1 over space. What it means is the energy that's, the kinetic energy is basically going as this power law. Don't worry about the functional form. Don't worry where that comes from, but that's the mathematical expression of scale invariance. And so knowing this function, knowing the form, is what enables us to make some headway. Now, artists have been really, really good at depicting turbulence. Here we have a beautiful picture from Leonardo da Vinci showing the big whirls and the smaller whirls and the smaller ones and the smaller and smaller ones. Here we have Van Gogh's famous Starry Night picture. And I want to just tell you a little bit about the different kinds of cascade that we know of in physics. So the regular one is called a 3D forward cascade. It basically says energy flows to smaller scales. So you stir the fluid up, the energy goes down to smaller scales, and makes some nice picture like this. It's called the 3D forward cascade, and it behaves in some way which you don't really need to worry about, but the main thing is that energy flows to small scales. If you live in 2 dimensions, okay, like the superfluids that I showed you before, in 2 dimensions, it turns out that when you stir a fluid, the energy and the angular momentum go to large scales, not to small scales. You've all seen the big red spot of Jupiter. You've all seen pictures of that. Okay? And a planetary atmosphere is roughly 2-dimensional. You've got a huge big planet, and you've got a thin skin of atmosphere around it. As it flows and does whatever it does, it's basically behaving like a 2-dimensional fluid, and what happens in 2-dimensional fluid is you get these huge big tornadoes or hurricanes or vortices, like the big red spot. That's something that happens generically in 2-dimensional fluids, and it's called the inverse cascade because energy flows to large scales. Now there's another kind of thing that can happen if you live in 2 dimensions. This was the inverse cascade that I told you about before, where energy flows not from large to small, but from small to large, and makes something like the big red spot of Jupiter. The other thing you can have, though, in 2 dimensions, is that swirliness, this angular momentum, if you like, this kind of rotational motion, that can be transferred to smaller scales. That behaves like the energy does. And why I can't go into, but the thing about it is, and I do want you to pay attention to this, when you write down the mathematical structure of that, it behaves as the inverse of space, so k is distance, but the inverse of distance, raised to the power -3, whereas when you have energy being transferred, it goes as wave number, that's the inverse of space, to the power 5/3. So they are different mathematical cascades, and that happens because you are in 2 dimensions and because you're transferring a different physical quantity. In one case, swirliness and rotational motion. In the other case, energy. So you have 2 separate cascades in 2 dimensions. So I told you about planetary atmospheres. So let's see, does it work? Let me show you some real data. So here is data from the Earth's atmosphere. These are very famous data, Nastrom and Gauge. This is the E of k, the spectral density. I'm not going to go and explain exactly what that is, but it's roughly the kinetic energy of the fluid motion. As a function of wavelength, or the inverse wavelength, is wave number. So this is basically space. On top here is the inverse of space, the distances. The way this graph is plotted, this is large length scales over here. This is small length scales over here. And what you can see, this is a graph which is a log-log graph. It's not a regular graph. You're not plotting the regular things. You're plotting the logarithms. 10 to the 1, 10 to the 2, 10 to the 3, up to 10 to the 8 over here. And the same thing, bless you, the same thing along the horizontal axis. So a straight line on this graph means a power law, and that means it's scale invariant. So the fact that these data fit these power laws proves to you that we do have scale-invariant cascades in real fluids. And what you can see here is you go from this 5/3 power law to this power law -3. Okay. So we can see all of these different cascades in real experimental data. There's a very strange puzzle about this picture. Okay. Some of the experts in the audience will know what it is. Anybody know what it is? Maybe some of the experts don't know. There's something very perplexing about this. That's not the problem. The problem is much worse than is the layer thin or thick. It's much worse than this. The problem is this: if you think about these cascades, the energy is flowing in the wrong direction. What people expected was that over here you would have the 5/3 cascade, and over here at small length scales you'd have the k to the -3. You'd have the swirliness cascade. Why? Because you expect the energy flowing from large to small all the way, and the only way you can do it in 2 dimensions is to have at small scales this one, the swirliness cascade, and at large scales this cascade, which is more or less 3-dimensional because of the thing that Lars said, and so that's what people expected. And it goes the other way round, and to this day, nobody fully understands why that is the case. Okay, so there's a mystery of turbulence, one mystery. So the story so far, the flow tells the flow how to change the flow. This is one of these problems like general relativity, where matter tells space how to move, and space tells matter how to move, and matter tells space how to curve. That's Einstein's equations in words, or in a poem, if you like. Okay, that's basically the general theory of relativity. Here, the flow tells the flow how to change the flow. This self-referential nonlinearity is what makes turbulence hard. And we can guess the outcome. Out of complexity comes a simple picture of scale-invariant cascades, which isn't the whole story, and it isn't the end of all our questions, but it's a lot of progress. So it all sounds very nice. So is it solved, and what's new? So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to talk about what's new. And so I want to start off by going back to 1883 to the first scientific studies of turbulence made by Osborne Reynolds in the late 19th century. So here you see his apparatus. It's a pipe, and he was interested in the flow of fluids in pipes. He was interested in everything, but this is where he did his controlled experiments. So he had a reservoir here, he sent in water through here, and then he observed what happened as the water flowed through this pipe, and he watched it very carefully. What he realized was that what happens, what you see, depends on how fast the fluid is going. But he also realized that it doesn't just depend on that, it also depends on the viscosity. Because if you have a fluid that is not very viscous, say like superfluid helium, you only have to push it a little bit and it'll immediately become turbulent. If, on the other hand, you have a fluid like honey, you have to push it, make it go really, really fast before it'll become turbulent. So he realized that there's a number that you can define, which is now called the Reynolds number, which is defined in this way. It's the flow speed times the system size, let's say the diameter of the pipe, divided by the viscosity and also divided by the density. Okay? So that number it has no dimensions, it's just a pure number, and it tells us every fluid you can assign it that's in motion, you can assign this number to it, and what that number is tells you whether the fluid is going to be behaving well or whether it's going to be behaving badly. So what he saw was when he changed the Reynolds number, somewhere around 2000, he saw these things called flashes of turbulence. And I want to tell you a little bit about those flashes of turbulence. We call them puffs today, but what they are basically is here the fluid is perfectly laminar, everything is predictable, and then here's a bit where it's completely chaotic and turbulent and you don't know what's happening, then laminar again, then turbulent, then laminar. So the way that turbulence arises is this alternating pattern of laminar and turbulent flow. So let's just go back and think about what that means. So here's our classical fluid. This was our honey. The velocity can swirl as slow as you like. Here's our quantum fluid, superfluid helium, where you can't swirl it slower than a certain amount. And this is laminar. This flow is typically much less than 1, whereas it doesn't take very much effort to make superfluid helium have a Reynolds number of about 1 million. Very turbulent. Okay, so here is a map of fluid flow. Every phenomena you encounter in the flow of fluids, you can put somewhere on this map. And the nice thing about this map is it's only one-dimensional. It's only a line. So it's much simpler than the two-dimensional Google Maps. The Google map of turbulence is one-dimensional. Okay? So Reynolds number being very large, let's say close to infinity, is pretty much what describes a turbulent fluid, like turbulent superfluid helium. So this is where you would get that scale-invariant cascade in fully developed turbulence. Somewhere down here, where Reynolds saw his flashes, that's somewhere around Reynolds number 1800 to 2400. If you work in experiments or you do observations of the Earth's atmosphere or something like that, of course the Reynolds number can never be infinity. But it turns out that this picture of the scale-invariant cascade still works even down to fairly low values of the Reynolds number. It doesn't have to be just at infinity. You can be at some medium value. So most of our understanding of turbulence comes in this kind of crossover region here. This is where you are. Okay, just about here, around about 2000 or so. That's the Reynolds number for the flow of blood in your heart. Okay? Now, it's rather unfortunate that you're here, because right at that point, that is where Reynolds saw his flashes of turbulence. And when you have those flashes, alternating turbulence, laminar, it's shaking things up a lot. And it can shake things up so much as the fluid goes through your blood vessels that it can burst them. The fact that you are in this transitional range of turbulence, where this transition is happening, this shocking behavior between turbulence and laminar, that can disrupt your arteries and give you aneurisms. And people die from this. So yes, turbulence can kill you. Down here in this range, 1800 to 2400, that's where all the people who are at the KITP workshop right now, that's where they're all working. Okay? Usually in KITP, when you have a workshop on turbulence, people are more or less arguing about what happens up here. But this time, we're arguing about what happens down here. So there's two real questions that one can ask about turbulence as a physicist. As physicists, I told you, we like to ask questions that have simple answers. Okay, like Kosterlitz and Fowlers did in their Nobel Prize-winning work. They took a very complicated problem, and then they asked, does this very simple model capture all the features that we want to see? Well, we can't expect that to work for every single phenomenon. But if it doesn't work, well, that's too bad. But you should always look for that kind of simplicity when you work on a new phenomenon, because that's where you're going to be able to make progress. So you expect to be able to make progress up here, and you expect to make progress when there's transitions. And that's why people now are studying this thing here. So the two main questions in turbulence, I would say, is there universal scaling behavior in fully developed turbulence? In various varieties of it. Some people study just pipe flows, some people study fluids heated from below, so you get convection. Some people study fluids going around in between cylinders. Some people study channels, some people study jets, some people push airplanes through fluids. There's many, many different ways you can ask these questions. The second question, and the one that we're going to talk about now for the next 11 minutes and 34 seconds, is how do fluids become turbulent as you increase their flow speed? That's what we really want to understand. How does this thing actually happen? And the answer, I'm not going to be able to tell you the whole answer because it's highly technical, and also we are still debating it. But we've made a lot of progress, and we've made a lot of progress because not of theoretical physics, but of experimental physics. Okay, so we have to remember this. Okay, theoretical physics is wonderful, but the primary way that we discover things about the natural world is by doing experiments. So what happened was in 1883, Reynolds did his measurements of turbulence in a pipe. By 2008, Björn Hoff and collaborators did a highly precise measurement of the laminar turbulence transition in an incredibly beautiful experiment. What they did was they took an apparatus, basically like Reynolds's, but much, much, much longer. And they put the fluid going in, the fluid comes out the other end, and the fluid just comes out with following the yellow trajectory like so. They asked a question that's a new question. They said, what is the probability that if I make a little bit of disturbance over here, create artificially a little bit of turbulence, what is the probability that it will survive until you get to the end of the pipe? It's a different kind of question. Okay, the sort of question that people had only just started to ask around about this time. And what they realized was this. They make a disturbance, the turbulence goes through the pipe, but maybe the turbulence will die. Maybe you're below the transition to turbulence. So if the fluid wants to be laminar and you try to make it turbulent, the turbulence will eventually die away. If the fluid wants to be turbulent, then when you kick it to be turbulent, it'll just stay turbulent. So what they wanted to ask is this. As I have a laminar fluid, a fluid that doesn't want to be turbulent, how long does it take for the turbulence to die? And does that time get bigger and bigger as I get closer and closer to the actual transition to turbulence? Because when the fluid is turbulent, you make a bit of turbulence, it will live forever. When the fluid, when the fluid wants to be laminar, below the critical Reynolds number, you make some turbulence and it will eventually die away. So the question is, how long does it take? And so what they did was they measured the fluid as it came out the end here, and if the turbulence was still there, it would follow the red trajectory. It would be slightly, there'd be more drag, because turbulence causes drag. Turbulence makes things go slower. Turbulence is why when you can, if you want to save energy, if you drive your car at 50 miles an hour rather than 70 miles an hour, you actually save double the amount of energy. The frictional drag goes down by a half. So what happens then is then they can measure. They ask the simple question: did the puff survive or not? Yes or no? Yes or no? Many, many times. Repeat this many times, and then you can work out the probability that a little bit of turbulence will survive. Now, when they did that, they found an amazing result. This is the logarithm of the lifetime of the turbulent puff, and there's a picture from a computer simulation that Mark Avila did. And the lifetime of this puff is plotted here as a function of this number that Reynolds came up with, the Reynolds number. So as I told you, the transition is somewhere around 2000, 2100. And what you see is that the data show that this lifetime does indeed increase from 100 in whatever units these are, up to 10 to the 8 by the time they got to somewhere over here. The lifetime goes up enormously fast as you change this number. And in fact, it goes up with a functional form, which is really unprecedented. It goes as e to the Reynolds number, for those of you who care. Very, very rapid rise in the lifetime of turbulence. When you go through the transition to turbulence, what you find is that if you make a little disturbance, it doesn't just die away. What happens is it kind of splits into two, and eventually makes two puffs. And those two puffs go along, and then they'll either decay, or maybe they'll split as well. And so you'll get some very complicated pattern of the behavior of the flow in this regime. And you can measure the lifetime between puffs splitting, and you can plot that, and you get a graph like that. And that's what Björn Hoff and company discovered in 2008. Now I want you to forget everything I've told you for the last 45 minutes. Okay? I want to tell you about something completely different, nothing to do with this. Remember at the beginning I told you that I spent half my time studying biology and half my time studying condensed matter physics. Now I want to tell you about the biology. Okay? You didn't sign up for this, did you? You can leave if you want, but don't, because there's a surprise coming. I want to talk about predator and prey. So I'm a theoretical physicist, so basically I work in the spherical cow approximation. So this could be a walrus, this could be a shark or something like this. Doesn't really matter what they're called, but this is the predator and this is the prey. I want you to ask, what happens in an ecosystem where you have prey like this and creatures like this, which are the predators, you have an ecosystem composed of all of these things. And then you ask, what is the fate of that ecosystem? What can happen? Well, let's think about it. Let's suppose that the prey birth rate is high, so somewhere up here. So that means that these rabbits, I guess they are rabbits, right? These rabbits are breeding like crazy. If they breed like crazy, it means that this thing, whatever it is, what is it actually, lynx or something? Yeah, this lynx will have enough food to eat, and so the lynx population will also grow. And what can happen is that they can come into some kind of balance. The more prey there are, the more predators are, but then the predators eat the prey, and so the prey population goes down. And so what actually happens is the population actually oscillates in some way like that. It's not actually trivial to prove that it oscillates, because well, anyway, that's another story, something that we work on. But you can show that at high enough birth rate, this population will be stable, and so you get coexistence of both the predator and the prey in some kind of happy equilibrium. Well, happy if you're a predator, unhappy if you're a prey. On the other hand, let's suppose that the birth rate of the prey is too small. They don't make enough babies. So what happens is the predator eats all the prey, and then there aren't any more foods for them to eat. So they starve and they go extinct, and then the prey eat all their food and they go extinct, and the whole ecosystem collapses. Okay, so that's what happens. That can happen. And there's a particular point where the birth rate is just large enough that the ecosystem suddenly starts to become stable and for the prey and the predator to coexist. So Hong Yan Shi, my student, did a simulation of a predator-prey ecosystem. It wasn't out of the blue. We knew what ecosystem to study because we did some fluid mechanics first. But let me just tell you this surprising thing. You start off with predators and prey, and you vary the birth rate, and you ask the following question. As I change the birth rate, how does the lifetime of the ecosystem change as I get close to that coexistence point? When you do that calculation, you get a graph that looks like this, and then when you go above a certain amount, you find that if you start off with a localized region of prey, it splits into two, just like the turbulent puffs did. So what we've discovered then is that over here, I have a calculation motivated purely by ecology, and over here, we have an experiment done purely from fluid mechanics. It seems that ecology is the same as turbulence. Now, this ecosystem that we simulated was not one that we had chosen at random. This was one that we had discovered as being the appropriate modes, the appropriate behavior of fluid turbulence very close to the transition. We did numerical simulations of turbulence, and we looked, because I work in phase transition, so I knew what kind of thing to look for, and we looked for certain types of modes, which I'm not going to go into, and we discovered that they behaved, we found those modes, and we discovered that they behaved like a predator-prey ecosystem. Strange but true, and we measured this and we quantified it and so on. And that picture I showed you at the beginning when you came in was a picture of that predator-prey ecosystem. The white swirly pattern was the what's called a zonal flow. It's the predator, and the red spaghetti was the turbulence, and that's the prey. So ecology is equal to turbulence. Turbulence looks just like ecology. In fact, it's much, much worse than that, or much, much better, depending on your point of view. The turbulence transition is connected to all sorts of things, it turns out. Now, what we did was we wanted to understand how fluids become turbulent. And what we discovered was that they behave like a model which I'll show you called percolation. But what we discovered along the way was that fluid turbulence behaves like ecology. This behavior in ecology also behaves like a model in high energy physics of particles scattering against each other. So it has exactly the same behavior as that, and it has the same behavior as percolation, fluid percolating like water percolating through the coffee granules in your coffee percolator in the morning. All of these things turn out to be mathematically related. Last year, Björn Hoff did an amazing experiment. He took two concentric cylinders, so you can see them over here, and he spun just the outer cylinder around. And when you looked at that, or edge on, what you saw was a pattern like this. Gray is laminar, black is turbulent. laminar, turbulent, laminar, turbulent, laminar, turbulent, laminar, turbulent. Now the fluid is going round and round like this. So, you take a snapshot, 1 rotation, 2 rotations, 3 rotations. You take those snapshots and you put them under each other. You look at where those turbulent patches go. So in the first time you do it, these turbulent patches are like this. The second time you do it, they've moved slightly to the right or to the left in some way. Maybe a little bit later, they've run into each other and they've merged. Maybe a little bit later, they split. They form some complicated pattern shown over here. So here's Bjorn's data, turbulence, laminar, turbulent, and this is the positions of these spots in time as they do their experiment. This is the ecosystem that we simulated. Here is the prey. We're just showing you the prey here. There's prey and there's predators elsewhere. And you look at the patterns of the prey as the system evolves in time, and it also makes the same structure. This pattern here, when you analyze this pattern, it looks kind of like a fractal. I'm sure many of you have heard of a fractal. This pattern has very interesting geometrical properties, and they show the same kind of scale-invariant cascade behavior that I talked about at the beginning. Mathematically, they look just like that. So why the turbulence looks like the ecology is because they both, when examined in the right way, make this pattern, this geometrical pattern in space and in time, and that's called directed percolation. All right, so what did you learn today? What I told you is that turbulence is an unpredictable, complex flow with structure at a wide range of length scales. I told you that in your body, the flow of blood is at the edge of turbulence, and crossing that transition can be fatal. I told you that through great ingenuity, many people, some of them here at this workshop, can now measure the transition very accurately and quantify its behavior. And there's mathematical analogies between what happens in turbulence to other fields in science, like the extinction transition in an ecosystem, percolation, the scattering of high energy elementary particles, and also, in fact, it turns out, the behavior of signals in nerves. Mathematically also, that turns out to be related to what happens in turbulence. So here's the people who did the work I showed you. This is Hong-Yin and me standing next to Reynolds' original experimental apparatus. It's still on display at the University of Manchester in England, and you can go there and be a scientific tourist and stand next to this apparatus. This is Tonglin in a sunnier place than Manchester, England. What is the take-home message I want you to know? Theoretical physics starts with a simple guess, because the exact equations are too hard to solve. And the scientific method is we compare the consequences of that guess with experiment, and the experiment suggests new guesses, and so we have this virtuous cycle of experiment and theory. Simple models, but not too simple, but still very, very simple, can describe very complicated phenomena. Why is physics so successful? Okay, it's not because physicists are smarter than everybody else. Okay? It's because we work on simple problems only. That's the reason. Okay? We choose the problems to be the simple, easy ones. Okay? Okay? Biology, much harder than physics. Economics, much harder. Okay? So we don't really know to what extent the physics approach can be used in more complex sciences like biology. We're discovering that it can be used in some cases, maybe not as much as we would like, but perhaps more than you might have expected. And the problem of turbulence is not solved, but we certainly understand a lot more than we did in Feynman's day, thanks to brilliant and controlled experiments and healthy interactions between experimenters, theorists, and computational physicists. And I want to end with a comment. This is a fortune cookie that I got. But think about this. There's something serious here, okay? So usually it's the case in science, particularly in physics, that physics and physicists is applied to some other problem, like biology. For example, the Nobel Prize a year or two ago was given to the invention of super-resolution microscopy, the ability to be able to look on small scales inside living cells using very clever microscopic methods. These were physics problems, physics techniques that were applied and totally revolutionized the biological sciences. Okay? So that's usually the direction. Physics makes some new microscope. Physics makes some new computer. Physics has some other thing like some other technique like optical tweezers. And then you can do manipulations and experiments you couldn't do otherwise, particularly in biology. There's a huge flowering of biology right now, becoming quantitative, becoming more mathematical, becoming more physical based because of these techniques. But this problem of turbulence that I showed you, and this is just my own work, not the other people's work, which I didn't have time to talk about, obviously. But what we did there was something rather interesting, because we did the opposite thing. We used biology to solve a problem in physics. Because I happen to know about stochastic ecosystems, and that's what we do in our biology work, we realized that we discovered, just by luck it happened to be, that the problem of the transition to turbulence turns out to be mathematically similar to that. And we knew how to understand that because we'd already done that. So we actually used our knowledge of biology to solve a physics problem. So turbulence is a life force, it is opportunity. Let's love turbulence and use it for change. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Okay, right. Two quick questions. First, pretty stupid. You mentioned invariant cascade, scale-invariant cascade. Sort of reminded me of Ponzi schemes in some way, financial Ponzi schemes.
It's a Ponzi scheme.
And the second one, quickly,
in some sense, yes.
The second one, quickly, we talked about simple models at the end and the cellular automata.
Yes, that's right. So, exactly. So the question was, are examples of these simple models cellular automata? Yes, you're absolutely right. The cellular automata produce very nice patterns that look like things you see in the real world, but it's even more than that. When I showed you the superfluid hydrodynamics picture, the strings moving around in 3 dimensions, like computer simulation, that was a kind of cellular automaton, very, very, very simple rules, producing behavior that really mimicked what you see in the real world. So yes, that's one of the examples of that.
So that suggests that you can use an impeller to whip water and produce heat?
You can use a propeller to whip water and
impeller,
make heat. Yes,
an impeller, like the Vitamix mixer, for instance. Because when I asked the salesman about that, he said, well, you're just whipping air into it and compressing the air. So I wondered, which is it? Because sometimes...
I think he told you an alternative fact.
Yeah, I was thinking that. So it seemed funny at the time. So you can basically propel water to a certain swirl velocity to produce heat.
Yes, it will produce heat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Practical application.
Yes. Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
So you showed how when you changed like the birth rate and the predator-prey rate, you had like a different. The stable populations changed when you did that.
Yeah.
And how like when you change it, there could be like multiple like stable populations given that rate. I was wondering.
As you change it, what happens is if you start off with a small localized population of prey, they will start to spread out, but they won't just decay away uniformly. The system will actually bifurcate and form 2 little communities of prey that will wander around and do their own thing.
And I was wondering if related to like climate and like climate forcing and that kind of stuff, if you see given a set of like specific like sun and wind energy like incident on the Earth, if there's multiple like any bifurcation or like stability in that system, different types, I don't know.
Right. I think what you're asking is if I force the Earth's biosphere, the climate, are there alternative states that it can occupy, and does it make transitions between them? For sure, yes. And in fact, one of the big questions that we have is about tipping points. So in other words, you can have one of those states, and then as you keep heating the Earth up, are we going to irreversibly go into the other one? And then once we're there, it's too late. There's nothing you can do to stop it. And that's the worry that people have, that could happen, that if we don't start now to avert climate change, that will happen. The big problem is, the gotcha in this is, we don't know whether there's a tipping point or not, but many people suspect there is. And we certainly have absolutely no idea of where it is. We don't know whether we should be comfortable with a 3.5 degree Fahrenheit change in the Earth, or 1 degree, or 7 degrees. We simply don't know. And but your point is absolutely right.
Yeah, I was wondering if you know anything about airflow in the lung, and I'm thinking of something like a cough, as I understand that there's narrowing within the lung, and if there is in fact turbulence that helps you move mucus in the lung.
So I don't know. I don't know. I haven't done the calculation, but I suspect so. Yes. Oh yeah, go ahead.
You had a nice plot showing the energy flow of k to the minus 3 versus k to the minus 5/3
Yes.
in the air.
Yes.
On distance scales of kilometers.
Yes, yes.
With data taken from commercial airliners.
That's right.
What is it that you actually measure? You can't see those things.
What they measure is they measure the velocity that you measure at that point in space, and then you plot it as a function of time, and so you measure how it's fluctuating, and then from the way it is fluctuating, then you compute mathematically what's known as its power spectrum. And so that's the quantity that's plotted, and then it's converted into wavelength by assuming that the time and space are related in some simple way. So basically, most of the time you measure the speed at one. You put your finger up to the wind, measure the fluctuations, and then you know, because the fluid is flowing, if I'm measuring a fluctuation here, a little bit later it's moved over to here, and so that's how you can work out the spatial part of it.
Then you effectively plot up the PSD.
The PSD. Yeah, yes, that's right.
Square root of Fourier.
Exactly, that's right. Yep, over here.
So on the Reynolds experiment, there were little puffs.
Yes.
Are those standing puffs, so they're individual particles that are moving through an area of turbulence, and then they become stable, and then they become turbulent, and the same particle becomes stable? And if so, can those areas of turbulence be predicted?
That's a really, really good question. So you might think, looking at those puffs, that they're just moving along with the fluid, okay? And they're not. Okay, you're asking, is the fluid moving through the puffs, as it were, like when you look at a wave coming into the shore, the fluid particles are actually going around in little circles like this. They're not all traveling like this, but the net effect is to cause a wave. It's kind of like that. It's a very good question. Those puffs move slightly slower than the rest of the fluid. And actually, we don't know why. We don't really understand how to predict that. I think it's a very important clue as to trying to understand the things about this transition to turbulence that we haven't fully grasped yet. And actually, the people who work in this have not really focused on that aspect. But it definitely is like that. When we do the computer simulations, you move at the same speed as the fluid, and you see these puffs going backwards a little bit. And we don't really understand exactly why. So thank you. Very good question.
I'm not sure if I got this right, but I thought I saw a graph where you had turbulence cascading and terminating in viscous flow?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, exactly. That's the standard picture.
Okay, good. So I'm trying to picture, how does entropy change in that whole thing? Is it discontinuous at that termination there, when it goes to viscous?
Well, okay, there's a long answer to that. Every speaker's nightmare is that somebody will say entropy, and then because we don't know what it is. And the thing about turbulence is that you're putting energy in, and then energy is being dissipated somehow. So it's not equilibrium. So it's not like doing thermodynamics, where you can say, here's a system, it's closed, I can work out what the entropy is. When you do entropy in school or in physics or chemistry, whatever, you're really looking at closed systems. Now when you have a system that's out of equilibrium, entropy isn't really defined. You can ask, how is entropy being generated? Okay, maybe that's what you mean. And that's a very complex question. Where is it being generated? Well, this picture that I showed you, if it's true, and by the way, it's not clear that it's true, but if this cascade picture is true, the entropy is only generated at the small scales where the viscosity starts to come into play and there's heating. So the whole process of the energy flowing down through this cascade would not generate any entropy, if it's true. Now, there's some people think that this cascade may be very close to being correct, but maybe not quite. And maybe there's ways that the energy can go from the large scale directly to the small scales without having to go through the intermediate scales. And if that happens, that would be another mechanism for increasing the entropy of the system. So very subtle, and it's to answer it properly, it requires a lot of very careful definition of what we mean by entropy and so on. But yeah, you're right. It makes you think about that.
Final question.
Okay, so I may be the only chemical engineer in the audience, but the Reynolds number is near and dear to our heart. We teach it
Sure.
immediately. And the predictive power and the practical usefulness of that is great. So
Yep.
my question for you is, since you found another system that's described by similar mathematics, is there another system for which there can be a dimensionless number that you can call the Goldenfeld number?
Well, I wouldn't do that. But yes, all of these systems, you can non-dimensionalize the units in some way. So in the ecology problem, for example, we know how to do that, and so almost always, you have these dimensionless numbers, as you know. So in the ecosystem one, for sure, yeah. But it's nothing new. I mean, this particular ecosystem is interesting because it's derived from the turbulent model from the numerical simulations. But we know how to analyze those equations using standard methods.
Right, and there must be other systems.
Yeah.
Advances in turbulence can then be predicted for other systems.
Yes, particularly I think in understanding plasma fusion, because the big problem in plasma fusion is how do you maintain the plasma, and the thing that the problem is that you get turbulence, and then the plasma sort of fluctuates out, hits the walls of the tokamak, and then it's all over. You lose the energy, and the plasma doesn't work anymore, and so you can't use it to make energy. And what we've learned is that the same flow configuration that we see in pipe flows, I showed you at the beginning in my little picture, this one, that special flow configuration actually is a predator on turbulence and sustains it. And so the interaction of this mode with turbulence can keep the plasma fusion devices functioning longer than they otherwise would. And so a lot of research is on that.
Okay, well, let's thank Nigel. And as usual, we do have cookies and some refreshments in the lounge near the courtyard.